Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
It is a gorge. Gorge.
Hello everyone, this is Major Green and this is a review of episode 6 of Star Trek Discovery. And I will give credit where credit is due. I think all the scenes on Vulcan were really good visually. The special effects were great, really movie level quality. My only complaint about that bit was that it looks too much like Star Wars. Especially those landing pads, it looks identical to the ones in Star Wars. And by the way, this show apparently has been stealing quite a lot of ideas from other sources. And this is something that I will discuss in a separate video because I have a lot to say about that. So I have a whole list of examples, so I leave that to a separate video. But the thing that annoyed me most in this episode is that apparently they have a holodeck now. A complete functioning holodeck that can simulate any environment, including people in it, and it looks completely realistic. And this is beyond anything that can be explained. So this is the breaking point with continuity. I can no longer defend the show. I made several videos actually trying to defend the show, to make up theories that will allow the show to coexist in the same continuity. But honestly, after this, I don't think I will bother trying anymore, because obviously the writers don't care. So why should we be making up excuses for it? And it almost feels like they're deliberately sabotaging their own franchise by alienating its own fans. So why should we be trying to make it all fit when obviously the writers couldn't care less? When the holograms first started to appear on the show, you could kind of accept it by saying that maybe the technology did exist in the original series, but simply was never used because it was kind of out of fashion. People kind of prefer to talk through the view screen, and that's why they didn't use this technology until much later. In Deep Space Nine, it came back into fashion, and people started talking through holograms again for a while until again it came out of fashion. So you could kind of make excuses for it, you could kind of accept it. However, the existence of a holodeck cannot be explained like this, because in the Next Generation we saw clearly how everybody was so excited about the holodeck because it was a brand new technology. The Enterprise D was the most advanced starship. When Riker entered the holodeck, he was completely amazed. So was Wesley Crusher. Maybe you could excuse it by saying that there were holodecks even before that, but simply this one is such a high quality. It's like total HD, so it looks completely realistic, while before that people could tell when they're in a holodeck, I guess. So maybe you could use that excuse. However, even in season 2, when Dr. Pulaski was on the ship and she entered the holodeck, she was also so amazed by it, and also LaForge started to explain the holodeck to her. Like, he explained the very basics of it. For example, the fact that when you walk inside the holodeck, the floor actually pulls you back so that you actually stay in the same spot, and the computer changes the perspective on the walls and changes it accordingly so that you think you are moving, but actually you are walking in the same spot on the floor. So if he has to explain basic stuff like that to Dr. Pulaski, who is a Starfleet officer, a commander, that line indicates that it's a brand new technology. So you cannot excuse it away, you cannot explain it away. And here in Discovery we see that they have a whole functioning holodeck with the same feature of them being able to walk around the holodeck as if they are actually there, and when the holodeck shuts down you can see that they are actually standing in a smaller room. And so obviously it had that same feature of the floor pulling them back to simulate the environment. And so it's exactly the same thing that LaForge 100 years later had to explain to Dr. Pulaski. Maybe I could have accepted it if Captain Lorca said something like this is a brand new prototype technology, no one else in the fleet has this technology, we're the only ones. If he said something like that, then maybe I'd feel a little bit better about this. If they would acknowledge the fact that they're not supposed to have this technology. But they never bother doing that. They just casually show us a holodeck as if it's okay in this time frame, which it's not. And so I really can't defend this show anymore. I mean, it's obvious they don't care about continuity. So I just wish they would have said it's in a different timeline. They should have just set it in the same timeline as the new movies, which actually, looking back now after this show, I actually appreciate those movies a lot more. I used to be very critical of them, but you know, at least they tried to explain it. They tried to explain the reboot while still honoring the original. So they used time travel to kind of explain it. The same way like the X-Men movies kind of rebooted themselves while still acknowledging the older movies. They didn't simply ignore them, they simply used time travel as a plot device to explain the reboot. And so the Kelvin timeline kind of did the same thing. And so looking back, I kind of appreciate those movies more, so I even wish this show would have been set in the new timeline, because at least then you would have the excuse of why everything is so different. You could say that the timeline changed even before that, even in the show Enterprise, which had the whole temporal war thing, and they actually got their hands on all kinds of technology they were not supposed to. like the Sullivan technology, all kinds of technology from the future. So maybe Starfleet actually used that to kind of upgrade their technology. And so by the time you got to the JJ movies, Starfleet was already actually using more advanced technology. You could basically say that Starfleet kind of got some help from the future, and that's why the technology is more advanced than it should be. So I think that the JJ movies were actually better than this show, because at least they felt like they are trying to pay homage to the original, they're trying to improve on the original, but without disrespecting it. And it was kind of a continuation by having Spock from the future, and so there was a sense of continuity in some way, and so I actually kind of appreciate that now, because look at what this show is doing. This show basically without any explanation is just rebooting and reimagining in the universe without any actual explanation in universe. I guess you could say maybe the Enterprise changed it all with the temporal Cold War. Starfleet simply got some technology from the future, so that's the only way to explain all of this. So I just wish they would set it in the JJ timeline and that's it. That would be a good way to excuse away all these inconsistencies. But trying to pretend it's in the original timeline while not even trying to make it consistent, while having all these mistakes in it, that just adds insult to injury in my opinion. They would have been better off setting it in the new JJ movies. And by the way, my biggest problem in those movies, I actually liked them in many ways. I enjoyed them for what they were, but my biggest problem with them is that I knew that because of those movies, they are basically rebooting the whole franchise, and that means we will never see the continuation with all the characters we know from the older shows, like Captain Picard and so on. I knew right away that this means basically that they are rebooting the whole franchise. So that was my biggest problem with the JJ movies. But this show makes those movies look so much better now, I think. So anyway, back to this episode. So they are now running around the corridors for sport, which also seems a bit out of place, because don't they have gyms for that? Why they need to run around the ship and interfere with other people walking around? And apparently they even have holodecks now, so why not use a holodeck? Why run around the corridors? Remember how annoyed Worf was when he saw kids running around the corridors and colliding with people? And he told them not to run around the corridors, and that makes sense. Like, imagine in your workplace, imagine you work in some building and you have people running around the corridors. That would be kind of inconvenient. So they should be using a gym for that. Now I think in one episode of Voyager, Tuvok was actually training a few officers and they were actually running through corridors, but in that show that can be excused because they have limited space on a small ship with only 2 holodecks, so that was okay under those circumstances. However, here it feels a little bit out of place. Now as for the Vulcans, when I first reviewed this show I said that I don't want to see Vulcans anymore because I know they will make them a-holes again. And that's exactly what they did in this episode. Once again, we see that most of the Vulcans apparently are some sort of racist a-holes. And now we have Vulcan suicide bombers. That was kind of stupid. And I'm not against the idea of having a violent, evil faction of Vulcans who want to sabotage the Federation. That would be fine. Like, we had a whole bunch of evil Vulcans in the past, in previous shows. However, the way they showed it in this episode was kind of stupid. So the evil Vulcan suddenly decides to blow himself up just to kill Sarek. And this was really dumb, because if he just wants to assassinate Sarek, then why not just kill him? Why sacrifice yourself to kill him? It would be much more clever to simply shoot that person from afar and not to kill yourself in the process, and this way you'll live on to fight another day. So what we saw in this episode was simply stupid. Why kill himself? It makes no sense. The only way to possibly explain it is if they later say that this whole group of fanatical Vulcans, maybe they are being secretly controlled by the Romulans. We know that the Romulans have a brainwashing technology, so maybe they brainwash Vulcans, and that all of them have to blow themselves up in the end of their mission as a way to cover up the tracks so that no one will ever find out that the Romulans were behind this. So I think this is the only way to explain it, because otherwise it was just stupid. Why kill himself? Why sacrifice himself if he can simply easily kill Sarek with a gun or simply stab him with the poison? Why kill himself when he can use himself for a future fight? So the only way I can explain it is that he was actually some kind of brainwashed agent, and that the Romulans programmed them to blow themselves up after every mission, simply so that no one can find out that the Romulans were behind their brainwashing. So that's the only way I can explain it. And still it would be kind of dumb, because, you know, he could have simply killed Sarek when he was not looking. Instead, he decides to start blowing himself slowly and starting to talk with Sarek and basically giving him a warning, giving him a chance to save himself. So this was like totally stupid. Like, if he just had to blow himself up, he could do it later after killing Sarek. Now, as for Lieutenant Ash Tyler, who many people suspect he might be the Klingon Vok disguised as a human to be a spy on the Discovery, which is an interesting theory which I hope turns out to be true, but we didn't really have any additional clues to it in this episode. Except maybe a little bit of dialogue I noticed when Captain Lorca said he wants him to be chief of security, and he replied by saying that he would be honored to serve on the Discovery. That bit of dialogue had a little bit of Klingon vibe to it, and so maybe that was a clue. But other than that, he appears to behave totally human in every way, so it's really hard to believe that a Klingon would have been so well trained in such a short time to be such a perfect spy with such a good understanding of humans. And so that's why I really doubt this theory. Now another clue might be in his very name. As I mentioned previously, this show borrows a lot of things from other movies, such as the Alien movies. And in the very first Alien movie, there was the guy called Ash, who turned out to be an android working for the evil company, and he later betrayed the rest of the crew. And this guy is also called Ash, so maybe that's not a coincidence. Also, he said that he knows how to fight Klingons so well because they used to beat him up in the Klingon prison, and so he picked a few things from them, which sounded kind of like an excuse for why he knows how to fight Klingons so well. And so I'm not sure about this theory, but I will be keeping a close eye on him. And I'm really hoping that they will actually use that tribble we saw in the early episodes, that maybe the tribble will actually play a role in blowing his cover and saving the ship when the time comes. And I'll be very happy if they do that, if they actually use the tribble in the story, because if they don't, then it was just an Easter egg. And I wouldn't like that. I want them to actually use it in the story somehow. And this kind of ties with what I said previously about them using characters from the original series. And I was actually kind of annoyed by that, because it seems like they are using them simply for name recognition, simply to satisfy the fans. But it has the disadvantage of actually making the universe seem smaller. And so I said in a previous video, I said, why even use Sarek? Why not use a different Vulcan? Why use Sarek for this? However, in this episode, they actually used him well. They actually added some backstory to him. And so it wasn't Sarek for nothing. They actually used him and what we know of him from other shows for the plot. And so I did actually like the parts with Sarek, because it added a little bit of backstory to him, and it actually kind of solved the puzzle we had about Sarek from since the original series. We never actually had a reason for Sarek to be opposed to Spock joining Starfleet. He always said that Spock should have went to the Science Academy on Vulcan instead of Starfleet, and we never had an explanation for that. We never had a reason, and in the beginning of the show it seems like they're only making the inconsistency worse, because he seemed to encourage Michael to go into Starfleet, and he didn't apparently have any problem with Starfleet. And so that raised the question of why he was so opposed to Spock going into Starfleet. And so this episode actually answered that question in a very good way, and therefore it wasn't pointless to have Sarek in this story, and so I have to give them points for this. And I think it added to the backstory of Sarek. So I guess that redeems using him in the show, because if not for this, then I would say they just used him for name recognition. They used him for nothing, and it is just stupid. But because of what they did in this episode, I kind of like it even. Of course, still there's a whole bunch of stuff that don't fit with other shows, like the fact that they can use telepathy over any distance. Now, my favorite part of the show, I said this before, is Captain Lorca. I think he's my favorite character. He's an absolutely evil a-hole, but I love him. He's the most interesting character by far. Villains are always more interesting, and he's one of the redeeming elements of this show, which makes me want to keep watching. And what he did in this episode was really kind of funny in an evil way, and I have a dark sense of humor, so I really find his character very entertaining. And so he's definitely one of the top reasons to keep watching this show. So that's it for this review. I'll be making more videos talking about specific things on this show in the near future, so please subscribe to my channel, please leave a like, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.